Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today into dedication and commitment, but with a twist. Our source materials is not your typical self-help book. Um, it's actually a collection of raw personal responses to questions about dedication,
Yeah, so it's interesting to get that perspective, I think. I think it'll be a really fascinating deep dive.
for sure. And you know me, I love to get into the nitty-gritty.
Mhm.
One thing that stood out to me was the idea of a mental itch. The source describes it as this driving force, like an itch you just have to scratch. They actually use this example of like pushing your limits weightlifting. You know it's going to burn, but you kind of want to see just how far you can go. Almost this like smiling through the struggle kind of thing.
Right, that's a great analogy. It captures the discomfort and the exhilaration of dedication, I think.
Yeah, and it actually reminds me of how the source talked about flow state too.
Oh, yeah. How did they connect those two?
They were talking about achieving flow state, not just in general, but specifically with this mental itch. Feeling so absorbed in the challenge, you kind of forget about everything else. Time just melts away.
Okay, so like finding that sweet spot where the challenge is big enough to fully engage you, but not so overwhelming that you just freeze up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the source even said that this sense of challenge being present might be super important to having long-term dedication.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's not always about seeking comfort and ease.
Right. Almost like our brains need a certain level of discomfort or
Yeah.
productive struggle, to really thrive.
Totally. Maybe that's why the mental age thing is so powerful. It helps us look at challenge and discomfort differently. Not things to be avoided, but like opportunities for growth and engagement.
Yeah, I like that.
So how do we take this mental itch feeling from physical stuff like weightlifting and apply it to more like mental pursuits, the kind of things most of us are dealing with?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think the key is finding that same challenge and flow feeling in our mental work. The source talks about breaking down large, complex tasks into smaller, more manageable steps, almost like a series of little mental itches to scratch along the way.
Right. It's like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. Each little accomplishment gives you that little hit of satisfaction and keeps you moving forward.
Exactly. And I think it also shows how important it is to choose goals and projects that you really resonate with.
Yeah.
The source makes it very clear that external rewards and validation will only take you so far.
Yeah, you need that internal drive.
Right. They argue that true dedication has to come from that intrinsic motivation, that sense of purpose that makes all the effort worth it, even when it's hard.
Finding that why to fuel your commitment, even when the what gets tough.
Exactly. And they even go as far as to say that community and support is just icing on the cake.
Oh, wow. So they're really emphasizing that internal drive, huh?
Yeah. They do say that a supportive network can be helpful, of course, but ultimately it's your own internal drive that gets you through the ups and downs.
I love that. It's like saying, yes, community is great, but you got to be able to light your own fire first.
Exactly. And speaking of pushing through challenges, the source makes this really interesting comparison between personal growth and physical exercise. To build strength and resilience, you have to be willing to tear down old patterns, beliefs, and habits.
Oh, like the saying, what doesn't challenge you doesn't change you.
Right.
That makes sense. I've definitely had times where I felt like I was going through a complete demolition phase,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
but I came out stronger and more capable on the other side, like a constant process of breaking down and rebuilding.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what we were saying about embracing challenges, finding that mental itch that keeps you engaged and growing.
So we've talked about finding that intrinsic motivation, embracing challenges, even tearing down old patterns to make room for growth. What other insights does the source have about building a dedicated mindset?
Well, one thing they talk about is taking baby steps and following breadcrumbs of clues.
Breadcrumbs of clues. I like that. What do they mean by that?
It's almost like an exploratory journey where you're not always sure of the exact destination, but you're willing to trust your instincts and follow those little hints and nudges along the way.
Interesting.
Yeah, they actually give this example of figuring out their career path. They didn't have this big predetermined plan. Instead, they paid attention to things that sparked their curiosity. The projects that energized them, the people who inspired them, like those little breadcrumbs of clues that pointed them in a general direction.
So being open to exploration, following those threads of interest and trusting that the path will unfold as you go.
Exactly. And it's really connected to their emphasis on experimentation and not being afraid to fail. They talk about failure not as an endpoint, but as like a crucial part of the learning process.
Yeah. I think so many people get stuck in the fear of failure. Like if you don't get it right the first time, it means you're not good enough or you're on the wrong path.
Yeah, I can see how that would hold people back.
For sure. But the source's perspective on failure is really refreshing.
How so?
They see it as an opportunity to learn, to gather information, to course correct, and ultimately to understand yourself and your capabilities better.
I like that. So maybe we need to reframe our whole relationship with fear and self-doubt. Instead of these big roadblocks, maybe they're more like cautious advisors,
Yeah.
friends who are always reminding us to be careful. But ultimately, they want us to succeed. That's a great way to think about it. Because fear and self-doubt can hold us back if we let them, but they can also serve a purpose. Sometimes those feelings are telling us to slow down, to reassess, to make sure we're really on a path that aligns with our values and aspirations.
Right. Like they're trying to protect us from wasting time and energy on things that aren't a good fit.
Hmm.
But how do you know when to listen to those doubts and when to push past them and keep going? Because sometimes fear can just straight up lie to you, right?
Oh, for sure. It's definitely a tricky balance, and the source admits that. They describe fear and self-doubt as being taxing, especially if they're allowed to just build up over time, like a weight that drags you down.
Yeah.
And they point out this internal conflict that happens a lot between your heart and your brain, your desires versus your doubts, your passions versus your fears.
So it's not about ignoring those feelings, more about understanding where they're coming from.
Exactly. And what they might be trying to tell you. The source suggests that looking at the pros and cons of a path can really help you navigate that conflict.
So acknowledge both the good and the bad, the allure of your passions, but also the potential risks.
Right. And then make a choice that feels aligned with your goals and well-being.
So finding that balance between following your heart and using your head, being passionate, but also practical, daring and discerning.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the key takeaways here. Dedication isn't just about willpower. It's about a mindset that embraces intuition and your rational mind, your desires and your doubts, your strengths and your vulnerabilities.
It's about recognizing that dedication is a journey, not a destination, and that path might not always be smooth or predictable.
Absolutely. It's a journey that's best traveled with self-awareness, curiosity, and a willingness to embrace the challenges and the triumphs along the way.
Okay, you've given us a lot to think about. But before we move on, I want to go back to something the source said about how these feelings of fear and self-doubt seem to pile up over time, especially after setbacks or failures. They even said that kids are often so much more motivated and fearless because they haven't accumulated that baggage yet.
That's a great point. It reminds us that a lot of our hesitation and self-doubt comes from learned experiences, not some inherent limitation, like we're carrying around these invisible weights from our past.
Holding us back from new challenges. So how do we shed some of that baggage? How do we get back that childlike sense of wonder and possibility, that willingness to try new things without being crippled by fear? Can we even unlearn those patterns of self-doubt after years and years?
Those are great questions, and ones that we'll keep exploring in this deep dive. But before we move on, I want to share one more thing the source said that I think is relevant here. They suggested that sometimes those feelings of fear and self-doubt might be trying to redirect us towards something better, something more true to ourselves, almost like our inner compass is recalibrating, nudging us towards a path that's more in harmony with our values and aspirations.
Wow, that's powerful. Like those feelings, instead of being enemies, are actually trying to guide us.
Exactly. It challenges the idea that we should always push through fear and self-doubt. Maybe sometimes they're valuable signals that we should pay attention to. Maybe they're pointing us towards things that are a better fit for our strengths and values, where we're more likely to thrive and experience that sense of satisfaction and purpose. That comes with true dedication, almost like it's saying, hey, there might be a more fulfilling path out there for you. Let's explore some other options.
Okay, so not silencing those doubts,
Yeah.
but listening to them differently. Asking yourself, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Is it a real concern about this path? Or just that old self-doubt popping up again?
Right. And that's where that advice about the pros and cons comes in. Take a step back from those feelings and try to be objective. Look at both the good and the bad, the potential benefits and the risks.
Like a personal cost-benefit analysis. Asking, is this commitment really what I want? Is it aligned with my values and goals? Am I willing to put in the time and energy, even when it gets tough?
Yeah, exactly. And remember, this process isn't always easy. Sometimes those internal conflicts can be really intense, and the answers might not be clear right away.
So how do you deal with that uncertainty when your heart and your head are pulling you in different directions?
That's where the following breadcrumbs of clues idea comes in. Instead of getting stuck in overthinking, they encourage you to trust your intuition. Pay attention to those little signs, those synchronicities, the things that might be guiding you towards the right path.
Like gut feelings. Moments of inspiration. Those unexpected connections that seem to happen when you're open to new possibilities.
Exactly. Be open to exploration. Let your curiosity lead you. Trust that the path will show itself even if you don't have all the answers right now.
I like that. Like saying, hey, I might not know exactly where I'm going, but I'm going to trust the journey.
Right. And they remind us that sometimes the best journeys have detours, unexpected turns, even setbacks. But as long as you stay connected to your values and desires, you're moving in the right direction, even if it's not always easy or predictable. And I think that's what's so cool about dedication. It's not about perfection or having all the answers up front. It's about the process, with all its challenges and wins, and allowing yourself to grow along the way.
It's about trusting yourself even when things are uncertain, having faith that you can handle whatever comes up.
Yeah. And it's about remembering that dedication isn't a solo mission. You might be the captain of your ship, but you don't have to sail alone.
You're bringing us back to community and support. That icing on the cake idea.
Exactly. I think it's worth looking at that analogy more. While they're clear that internal motivation is key, they also acknowledge that support can make things a lot easier. It's like having a crew cheering you on, offering encouragement, maybe even helping out when things get rough.
Okay, so it's not about relying on others for motivation or validation, but recognizing that we're all part of something bigger.
Yeah, we can learn from each other and support each other's growth. And when you approach community that way, it can be incredibly powerful.
It's like we're all weaving this tapestry of dedication together, each of us adding our own unique thread to create something bigger and more beautiful than we could alone.
I love that. And it reminds us that dedication isn't just about our own goals. It's about contributing to something larger, our families, our communities, the world.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's shift gears a bit. Back to that idea of pushing beyond comfort zones. The source used that image of running against the current.
Oh, yeah. Such a good metaphor. When you're really dedicated to something, you're often going against the grain, challenging the status quo. And it can be tiring and scary, but there's also this incredible sense of purpose, and you feel so alive.
I can relate to that. I've definitely had times where I felt like I was paddling upstream with everything I had, just to make a little progress.
Mhm.
But in those moments, I also felt this surge of energy and determination, like I knew I was on the right path, even if it was hard.
Wow. That's amazing. It really shows how transformative dedication can be. When you're willing to push yourself to embrace those challenges, you not only achieve your goals, but you change on the inside too. You become more resilient, you build character, you grow.
It's like forging yourself in fire.
Yes.
You become stronger and more resilient through the struggle and the victories.
Exactly. And this running against the current doesn't have to be some huge heroic effort. It can be about the little things, the small daily acts of dedication, the moments when you choose courage over comfort, when you show up for yourself and the things that matter to you, even when you don't feel like it.
So those little choices that add up over time, like going for a run when it's cold, or sticking to your writing schedule even when you're not inspired, or being there for a friend when you're exhausted.
Exactly. Those are the things that build the foundation for lasting change. Those moments of running against the current are what shape you into who you're meant to be.
Okay, we've talked about a lot, but I want to make sure we touch on one more thing from the source before we wrap up.
Mm.
That feeling of internal conflict that comes up when you're trying to be dedicated. The tension between your passions and your doubts, your desires and your fears.
Right. That's something I think a lot of people struggle with. That battle between the part of you that wants to go for it, chase your dreams, commit to something meaningful, and the part that holds you back, whispers doubts, reminds you of past failures or potential risks.
So how do you deal with that? How do you find the balance between following your heart and listening to your head? Between being bold and being wise?
That's the big question, isn't it? And the source offers some good advice. They say that looking at the pros and cons can help you make a decision. Acknowledge both the good and the bad, the exciting parts and the risky parts, and then make a choice that feels right for you and your goals.
So don't just blindly follow your heart or let fear control you. Find that middle ground where you honor both your desires and your wisdom.
Exactly. And I think that involves getting to know yourself really well. Understand your strengths and weaknesses, what triggers you. Learn to tell the difference between fear that's protecting you and fear that's holding you back.
Like learning to trust your gut, that inner voice that guides you towards the right path, even if it doesn't always make sense logically.
Yeah. And this is where the following breadcrumbs of clues thing comes in again. Be open to exploring trust, those little nudges and synchronicities that might lead you to something unexpected.
To be intentional, but also open to possibilities. Have a direction, but be open to surprises.
Right. That's one of the best things about dedication. It's not about having a rigid plan. It's about embracing the journey and trusting that you have the strength to handle whatever happens.
Surrendering to the process, knowing that even if you mess up, you can always get back on track.
Exactly. And that leads us to what the source said about how past failures can affect how much fear and self-doubt we have,
Yeah, they said it's like each setback adds another layer of hesitation,
making it harder to commit to new things.
almost like your brain is trying to protect you from feeling that pain again. Makes you wonder how much of our hesitation comes from past experiences versus the actual challenge in front of us.
That is a good question. It shows how important it is to really look at your fears. Are they based on something real in this situation, or are they just echoes of the past that might not even apply anymore?
Separating the signal from the noise.
Yeah,
Figure out which fears are valid and deal with those. And let go of the ones that are just holding you back.
exactly. That's a big part of having a dedicated mindset. Acknowledge your fears, but don't let them stop you.
Choose courage over comfort. Realize that you grow the most outside of your comfort zone.
And remember what the source said about how kids are often so motivated because they haven't failed as much. They haven't built up those layers of self-doubt yet.
They're not afraid to try new things.
Yeah, they just have this belief that they can do anything.
Makes you think, how can we get back to that? Can we unlearn those patterns of self-doubt? Approach challenges with a fresh perspective.
I think so. It's about having a growth mindset, seeing failure as a chance to learn, not a personal defeat, embracing the ups and downs, knowing that setbacks are going to happen.
And remember what the source said about fear and self-doubt being signals, maybe guiding us to something better.
Right. Not ignoring those feelings, but trying to understand them.
Maybe they're pointing us towards things that are a better fit for us.
It's about being open to the idea that your first path might not be the right one.
And that brings us back to embracing the journey and being willing to change course. Dedication isn't always about sticking to one goal no matter what. It's about being flexible and making choices that help you grow. And that's a really important takeaway. It's not about having all the answers or finding the perfect path. It's about being willing to explore, to try things out, and to accept that there will be twists and turns along the way.
It's about trusting your gut, following your curiosity, letting those breadcrumbs of clues lead you to unexpected and amazing places, and knowing that dedication isn't a finish line, it's an ongoing process.
Embracing the messiness that challenges the uncertainty, and remembering that even when you stumble, you can always get back up, learn from it, and keep going.
Yeah, dedication is a journey, not a destination. It has both challenges and rewards.
It's about pushing yourself, but also knowing your limits.
It's about those small, consistent actions and celebrating the little wins.
It's about seeing failure as a part of growth, not the opposite of success.
And it's about that passion and purpose that keeps you going even when it's tough.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into dedication and commitment, let's leave you with this thought. How can you use that idea of following breadcrumbs of clues in your own life? What small steps can you take today to nurture your dedication and get closer to what really matters to you? You know, it's funny, when we talk about dedication, we often picture these big, grand gestures. But as we've seen, it's the small things, the everyday choices that really add up.
Yeah, for sure. That's why the baby steps idea is so important. The source talks about it like making a mosaic. Each tiny piece might not seem like much on its own, but together they create this amazing picture.
Right. Like, don't underestimate those small actions. They might not feel huge in the moment, but over time, they can lead to big changes.
Absolutely. And it's good to remember that dedication isn't always a straight line. Some days you'll be super motivated, and other days you'll want to quit. That's totally normal. The key is just keep showing up even when it's hard, and trust that even those tough moments are there for a reason.
So it's about riding the waves right, the ups and the downs. And speaking of downs, I'm curious how we can deal with self-doubt and discouragement. Those feelings always seem to come up when you're pushing yourself.
That is a great question. The source has some interesting ideas about that. They say that instead of fighting those feelings of self-doubt, maybe we can see them as messengers, like allies in disguise even.
Really? How can self-doubt be an ally? It usually feels so crippling.
Well, the source says that sometimes those feelings are trying to point you in a better direction, towards something that's more true to yourself.
Oh, wow. So they're like, hey, this might not be the right fit.
Right.
Let's try something else that fits your values and dreams better.
Exactly. And it's in those moments when you're unsure, when your old beliefs are challenged, that you get to make a real choice about who you want to be and what you want to do.
So not trying to shut those doubts up, but really listening to them.
Yeah.
Like asking yourself, okay, is this a real problem with this path, or is this just my old self-doubt talking?
That's it. That's such a powerful way to look at it. You're not controlled by your emotions. You can choose how to react to them, listen to them with kindness, and then decide how you want to move forward.
I like that. Like you're taking control of your feelings and using them to make good choices.
Yeah. That's a really important skill for dedication because, let's be honest, there will always be challenges and setbacks and doubts along the way. But it's how you react to them that matters.
And that takes us back to weighing the pros and cons right, taking a step back and looking at things objectively.
Exactly. Sometimes our emotions can make it hard to see clearly, but when you take the time to think about the good and the bad, the potential rewards and risks, you can make smarter choices.
Choices that are good for you in the long run. So finding that middle ground between passion and being careful.
Absolutely. And I think that comes down to knowing yourself, understanding your strengths and weaknesses and what makes you pick, knowing when to trust your gut and when to be more cautious.
Like learning to listen to your intuition, that inner voice that guides you, even when things don't make sense logically.
Exactly. And that's where following those breadcrumbs of clues is so important. Be open to new possibilities and trust those little nudges that might lead you somewhere amazing.
So be intentional, but also flexible. Have a plan, but be ready for surprises.
That's the beauty of dedication. It's not about following a script. It's about embracing the journey and knowing you can handle anything that comes up.
It's about trusting yourself and knowing that even if you make mistakes, you can always get back on track. I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about when it comes to dedication and commitment.
Me too. It's been a really insightful conversation.
It's not about having all the answers or finding the perfect path. It's about being willing to explore and experiment and to be okay with the ups and downs that come with growing and discovering yourself.
And I think the source would agree with that. It's about trusting your instincts, following your curiosity, and letting those breadcrumbs of clues lead you to unexpected and fulfilling destinations. It's about realizing that dedication isn't a finish line. It's an ongoing process of learning and changing.
Exactly. It's about embracing the challenges and uncertainties that come with pursuing your passions and committing to something bigger than yourself. And it's about knowing that even when you stumble, you can always pick yourself up, learn from it, and keep moving forward with even more purpose and determination.
It's about the journey, not the destination, the challenges and the rewards.
It's about pushing yourself, but also respecting your limits.
It's about those small, consistent efforts and celebrating every step along the way.
It's about seeing failure as a part of the process, not the end of it.
And it's about that inner spark of passion and purpose that keeps you going even when things are tough.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into dedication, we hope you found it helpful and inspiring. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that dedication burning bright. Thanks for listening.